If you do respond to a question in chat, please just read the question aloud, since the chat doesn't show up in the recording. So yeah, we'll go ahead and turn it on over to you and have you introduce yourself.
Okay, sounds good. Greetings. My name is Cormac Mor. I am a Baron of the Court of Caid and a companion of the Order of the Pelican, and for a while I was Wreath King of Arms of the Society. And today we are going to be talking about heraldry for non-heralds, otherwise known as designing your arms. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so you can see the PowerPoint that we're talking about. Now, this is based off of a tutorial that I wrote on a website. It was originally called Heraldry for Fighters and Children, and the title was changed when I got complaints from the children who felt it was offensive. The comparison was a problem. So it got changed for Heraldry for Non-Heralds. This is designed to be a primer in heraldry that anyone can follow, rather than having it be more the academic language specifically for heralds, by heralds, to heralds, around, within, and without heralds. So this is being recorded on the 21st of March, and Societatis 55 in the Barony of Terra, Pomaria. Now, why are you here? If you're watching this, then there's one of two things that's likely. Either you want to design new arms in the SCA, or you've already designed them based on what you've seen in the SCA and you now want to get them registered. And your design has your favorite activities in the SCA and your entire persona story and references to your modern life. So you have a sword because you're a fighter, shamrock because you're Irish in persona. You've got a red hat in one corner because you're a programmer, and a black dog named because it's got your black dog named Soph. And you have all of this stuff on the shield. And it's really important that you have all this stuff on the shield. You've seen it all throughout the SCA, and so it must absolutely be period, right? Well, no. Turns out most period heraldry is very simple. There's no, as we understand heraldry as an inherited concept, inherited property, it really doesn't exist before the 1100s. Most armorial bearings were inherited, so if you were an armiger in period, you most likely didn't design your own arms, but instead you had inherited them from your father, who inherited from his father, who inherited from his father, and so on down the line. Simple designs were seen simpler earlier in period, and the more complex designs that we see in SCA style armory are more indicative of what we consider the decadent Tudor times, where you have a king of arms in England who basically wanted to make sure that the old guard was separated from the nouveau riche. And so anyone who applied for new arms got super complex armory that was seen as gauche by those of the upper class. All of which is to say that the super complex armory borne by Duke Saxon Blood Axe, or whatever his name happens to be, in period would have been borne by someone dressed like this. However, the SCA is not history and is not a pure historical reenactment society, and so people who are from time periods that do not have heraldry can, in fact, have heraldry. So let's take a look at period heraldry. So it was pretty simple. So this is from 1250, and this is the Liber Adiamentorum by Matthew Paris. And as you can see, each design is pretty simple. You see two, maybe three tinctures, colors. We'll get to the terminology in the field. One, maybe two designs, some of which are repeated. But generally, it's a very simple design. You're not seeing 3, 4, and 5 different concepts on a single shield. And this is going to carry over into the 1500s. This is Thomas Jennen's book. It's an armorial, which means that the shields are ordered instead of by alphabetical order or by rank, or instead by type of charge, which is why all the shields on this particular page all have fesses, which is the horizontal stripe. But you can still see, just as a quick sampling, it's still pretty simple. 2, maybe 3 different colors, 1 or 2 different concepts being displayed on the field. Really very simple. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, we've gotten a good glimpse of what period heraldry is. We're going to use some of the language that the heralds used, and we're going to start with the rule of tincture. This is a phrase that the heralds will repeat over and over and over again to new people, to new submitters, and expect them to understand instantly what we're talking about. The rule of tincture being, thou shalt not place a metal upon a metal, or a color upon a color. And of course, you have no idea what that means because, you know, what are you even talking about? So we're going to go over this. So there are 7 tinctures in heraldry. Tinctures are what modern people would call colors, and they're divided into darks and lights. Darks are called colors and lights are called metals because they are representatives of metal in period. So the colors include gules for red, azure for blue, this didn't get organized properly, purpure for purple, sable for black, and vert for green. These are the darker colors, and then the lighter colors, which are called metals, are argent and ore. And there's the label for that because I put this together last minute slapdash. More on that later. But so the rule of tincture basically says that you can't put dark things on dark things or light things on light things because they're really hard to see. So you can't put a color on a color or a metal on a metal. If you try to put purple on black, it's really hard to see. If you try to put white on yellow, it's really hard to see. Nice visual representation of this is this table that I created. If you can read the text really easily, then that means it has good contrast. So can you put gules on argent? Yes, red on white looks really good. Can you put sable on ore? Yes, black on yellow is one of the most striking visual contrasts in design. Can you put azure on gules? Not particularly. Can you put azure on azure? If you can't read the word, the answer is probably no. Does anyone have any questions on this so far? Because I can't see the chat either, so I don't know if anyone's popping up. Not hearing anything, let's go ahead and move on. There's a concept called neutral charges and fields. A charge is a thing that you put on the field. The field is the background of the shield. So if a field or a charge, so if the background or the thing on the background is evenly split between a metal and a color, that is between a light and a dark tincture, then it is considered neutral for purposes of contrast. So I'm going to give a couple examples and say why the design will or won't work. And we're just going to use dots because it's really easy. So this is a field that divided ore and azure with a gules charge. Because the field is evenly split between a metal and a color, it's fine. This is a roundel or a dot that is evenly split between gules and ore on an azure background. Same thing. The dot is neutral, so it is fine to be on either a color or a metal background. Here we see an item which is both gules and azure. It is not neutral because it's 2 different colors, but it's color or 2 colors on a metal. It has good contrast, it's just fine. Likewise here, ore and argent on sable, perfectly fine. This is a concept called counterchanging, where you would split both the charge and the field, and you would use 2 different tinctures, a light and a dark, and because they're not sitting on top of one another, it's good contrast for all. You can still see it's the same circle that you've seen in the previous designs. Now this is not allowed. It is 2 colors on a color, so it does not have good contrast and it would be returned. Likewise, this would be counterchanging, but still using colors and colors on colors and colors. These would not be allowed. Any questions before we move on? Fantastic. Seeing none, let's go ahead and talk about furs. There's a lot of interesting beliefs about furs, but let's go ahead and see if we can clear them up. Furs are a distinctive field treatment that represent actual fur in heraldry. There's 2 real general kinds of fur. They're ermine and vair. Ermine is basically a representation of ferret fur with little tails hanging off. You would see these in garments, especially of English gentry. Ermine was particularly popular among the English. You would also see these in linings and the like, but most frequently you would see it in the linings of caps of maintenance or other caps that would hold the the crowns and coronets of the royalty and nobility, and also their mantles. And the other is ver, which is a representation of squirrel pelts, usually gray squirrels. And it's a tessellated layout of the bellies and backs of the squirrels that are lined up in what are called ver bells. There are some distinctive variants of these furs. So, for example, on the left-hand side, we have ermine, so white background with black ermine tails. We have ermine noir, which is gold background with black ermine tails. Then below that, we have counter ermine, which is white ermine tails on black. And we have paean, which is black with gold ermine tails. But you can have other variants of ermine, excuse me, including, for example, we have or ermined purpure, which is a gold background with purple ermine spots, or vert ermined or, which is a green background with gold ermine spots. Any tincture combination that has good contrast is allowed in SCA heraldry. On the right-hand side, we have the normal ver, which is azure and argent ver bells. But below that, we have very, or, and gules. This is a period variant of ver. There are also variants where the bells line up differently. There's something called ver on point. There's different ways that you can line up the furs, several of which are period. There's also other tessellations which are similarly furry. Sometimes the ver bells are more angular. Sometimes they're actually T shapes, which is called potent. But this is an overview, and I didn't feel like drawing those, so we're going to go ahead and move on. At this point, there are two confessions I need to make. One, this tutorial is available both on my website at poorhouse.com, specifically at herald.poorhouse.com/armory/H4F, which stands for Heraldry for Fighters, the previous title of this tutorial. And also, it was adopted by the College of Arms as the new primer, replacing a previous primer that had been put in. So that's the first confession, is that all of the information you're hearing from me right now is available on a website, and you don't actually have to listen to me. And the other confession is that it takes a lot of time to take an existing tutorial and put it into a PowerPoint format. So the rest of this slideshow does not exist. So we're going to go ahead and actually shift to the website for the remainder of the tutorial. This is the second act twist that I had promised the people who were in the pre-meeting prior to the class beginning. So we're actually going to shift, and can everyone see the website in front of you now? Fantastic. So next we're going to be talking about field divisions. So as you saw when I was showing tincture combinations and neutral charges and neutral fields, you can divide the field. We saw it divided vertically, which is called per pale, but there are other ways that you can divide the field as well. So you can divide it horizontally in a term known as per fess. You can divide it diagonally, either from the viewer's left to the top left to bottom right, which is called per bend, or flipping it around, it's called per bend sinister. You can divide it in an upside down V called per chevron. You can divide it both vertically and horizontally in a term called quarterly. You can divide it both diagonal directions, which is called per saltire, or you can divide it horizontally, vertically, diagonally, and other diagonally, which is called gyrony. There are a couple of other ones as well, but this is the overview, and so I'm covering the basics here. There's the possibility of doing curved lines, which is called gyrony arrondi. You can also do per saltire arrondi and per pale arrondi. Sorry, per saltire and quarterly arrondi, but generally the rest you should not do arrondi. These are plain lines of division. They're nice and smooth, but there are variants that you can use. Here are some of them. Dovetailed, which is reference to woodworking joinery. Embattled, as reference to the battlements on top of a castle. You have engrailed, which forms little cup shapes. You have indented, dent as in teeth, like sharp, nasty, pointy teeth, so the jagged nature. Invected, which is another form of infected, meaning it's bumps or buboes on from the bottom to the top, you have nebulae, which is clouds. It's a stylized cloud shape. Ragulae, which is a representation of how cut limbs off of a tree might show up. You have Rayani, which is flame. You have Wavy, which is water, and you have Urdi, which is a form of palisade that I'm not quite sure where they came up with it, but nonetheless, there it is. Urdi is not particularly common, but the rest are fairly common, especially in SCA heraldry. A lot of people really like Rayani until they have to sew it. You can also do other things to the field rather than dividing it. You can scatter a whole bunch of things on it. So this, for example, this is semi of roundels, roundels ore in particular, which are also known as bezants. So this field treatment is called bezanty. Any questions on that before we move on? Fantastic. So you can divide the field, but you can also put stripes onto the field, things that are called ordinaries. These are the most common charges in period heraldry. A lot of people think of them as field divisions in their own right. They really are not. These are charges. They create a separate layer on the field rather than being a part of the field. You're going to recognize a lot of the language. Field divided per pale, or it can also have a pale. Instead of per fess, it's a fess. Instead of per bend, it's a bend. Instead of per bend sinister, it's a bend sinister. Instead of per chevron, it is a chevron. That's the V. A quarter is something different. So instead of quarterly, it wouldn't be called per quarter, or a quarter. Instead of cross, unsurprisingly, a horizontal and vertical line is going to create a cross. Two diagonal lines are going to create a saltire. And a new shape, 3 lines all converging in the center, is a pall, which is a representation of the pallium that bishops would wear, the piece that comes across each shoulder, meets, and then goes down in the center. So these are central ordinaries. The reason they're called ordinaries, other than they're ordinaries, that they are the central focus in a lot of heraldry. There's also something called a sub-ordinary. So rather than the central charge, they are peripheral charges. So you have a chief, which is the stripe up top. You have a base, which is the piece on the bottom. You have a tierce, which is the piece on either the left or right-hand side. It can be blazoned either way. Here's the quarter. So it's like 1/4 of the quarterly field. Canton is a smaller version of that. We have a gyron. So that's one piece of gyrony. Around the edges, we have a bordure. If you pull the bordure in and show more of the field on the outside, you get an oral. And then you have a gore, which is a sort of swooping piece that comes in before it goes down. And finally, flanches. Flanches are a representation of a sideless surcoat, among other things, also being flanches of a body. But a lot of people look at it and go, oh, yes, of course, the sideless surcoat silhouette, seeing the inside of the body as well as the outer garment. So there's the ordinaries and subordinaries. These are all things that you can use. I will note that using a quarter or a canton is going to be assumed, if you put things on top of it, to be considered an augmentation of arms, which is a very special honor that not everybody is allowed to use. If you do not know if you have an augmentation of arms, you probably don't and should avoid those. Seeing no questions before I move on, let's go on to the next page. So this is where I talk for quite a bit about how you can put just about anything that existed in period onto your shield. If it is a normal creature or a fantastical creature, if it is a plant, even a fantastical plant, such as there's a thing called a vegetable lamb, which is where some people believed wool came from. So it's a plant that has little sheepies coming out of the bulbs. Some people believe it's a representation of cotton. I'm not going to naysay them. Tools, weapons, buildings, any number of things you can put on your shield. And the more creative you get in the item that you want to use, the less likely it is someone else will have it, which means that you'll be able to come up with something far simpler. If you want to represent that you're a fighter, consider putting a piece of armor that people wouldn't normally consider using, such as an aventail, rather than a sword, which everybody uses because it's a sword. Any questions on this before we move on? Fantastic. We're going to go over postures next. So the postures of animals have specific language. So you can't just throw an animal on there doing whatever. It has to be in a position, a posture that can be described. And there's a couple of different categories for the kinds of critter. The first that we'll be looking at, one of the most popular, is quadrupeds. So these are things with 4 limbs that go on the ground. So lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, are all quadrupeds. So are dragons, even though they also have winged limbs, they are considered quadrupeds for the purposes of heraldry. So we have rampant, which is the body erect with 3 limbs up. This is what we see, for example, in the arms of Tyr for the lion rampant. And that's the full-on fighting stance, putting as many claws up in the air as possible. We have salient, which is leaping, which is like rampant, except 2 paws are on the ground rather than 1. We have statant, which is all 4 on the ground, standing, and passant, which is walking. Statant has all 4 legs on the ground, passant has 1 up. Couchant, or meatloafant, as some people might describe for cats, is what we see in the Egyptian Sphinx, where all 4 paws are on the ground, but also the body. There are different terms for this for different kinds of critters. For example, a stag is described as lodged, but it's basically the same posture. We have courant, or Superman. This is a representation of running, that is all 4 limbs splayed out with the body horizontal. We have sagent, which is sitting on the behind, all 4 limbs down with the body sort of diagonally. And then we have sagent erect, which is the bottom on the ground and the limbs up. There is also statant erect, which is functionally identical to salient. It's, instead of sitting on its bottom, it's standing up on its hind paws. Here's a couple of description of different terms: climant, trippant, et gaze, what have you. These are all super specific heraldies that you don't necessarily need to know as a submitter, but you might see them in blazons from time to time. The next thing we'll be looking at are bird postures. There are 4 common ones and a handful of other ones, but the basic ones that you need to know are displayed, which is the body facing forward, limbs to either side, both the legs going out in either direction and the limbs. We have close, which is seen in profile with the wings close to the body, closed down. We have rising, which has the wings up, also in profile. And we have volant, or the wings outspread onto either side of the body and flying. There's various different directions that those can take, but these are the general pieces. There are certain specific terms for specific critters, such as a peacock can be in its pride or in its vanity, with the tail splayed out at the viewer as if trying to attract a mate. There's the crane in its vigilance, which is close but holding a rock to throw at others. Or the pelican in their piety, which is any number of different postures, but the important thing is that it is stabbing its own breast and bleeding to feed its young. Any questions on birds and beasts before I go on to fish? Seeing none, moving on. Fish and other critters are kind of interesting because they're swimming, because they don't really have many limbs to speak of. We have special terms for them, including niant, which is the swimming horizontally, horiant, which is swimming up, urinant, which is swimming down. For snakes, there are a number of different postures, including node, which is tied into a knot, involved, which is spinning in a spiral, vorant and annula, which is the Ouroboros shape of a snake when it's biting its own tail, or glissant, which is creating an undulating pattern, either horizontally. We also see glissant to chief, which is doing a wavy vertical line. As for insects, almost all of them are going to be turgient. Every once in a while we will see them in profile, but turgient is seen from above, or as if on a lepidopterist's display case. with the wings displayed to either side. Some modifications that I have listed here. The head posture, for example, if I'm rampant this way, this is the normal. If I'm looking at the viewer, this is called guardant. If I'm looking behind my shoulder, this is called regardant. The wings can be either endorsed, which is back to back, or displayed, which is on either side of the body. There are a couple of other ones, but they're rather specific. And if you have any questions on those when you are submitting Herald, or you are submitting, go ahead and talk to your Herald about them. So you've listened to this, and I've been going for about 30 minutes at this point, and you've probably been taking fastidious notes. Of course, you've been keeping track of everything that you've been wanting to do. You've seen, oh yeah, definitely, I want to do a lion because I'm English, and a sword because I'm a fighter, and it's clear that you weren't paying attention, that you shouldn't be doing those things. You should be looking for unique things. But if you really, really, really want a lion and a sword, then you have them written down. And you've also written down the tinctures that you're particularly fond of, and perhaps a field division. So you can start putting them all together and sort of seeing what it is that you want to have for your final design. So the example that I have here, I had a submitter who was looking at vert and argent, or green and white, was particularly fond of, as well as azure or blue, if you really had to add a little bit more. Really likes both per chevron and per pale. If he has it to have a field division, embattled is a really good one. And chief is kind of cool. Bend is kind of cool, like the diagonal asymmetrical look. And the person happens to be a water bearer, so is interested in the water bouget, which is a stylized pair of buckets that are attached to a stick that's sort of a yoke that you would hang around your neck. So we come up with a couple of different designs that we can throw together, trying to keep it as simple as possible. You like a water bouget, you like a field. Water bougets aren't particularly popular, so we take a water bouget on a field and we check it out. Turns out the first one, at least when I wrote this, is clear. The second one is also clear and is in fact what the submitter decided to go with, although I don't think they actually ever submitted it. But other modifications could be added. If the second design was taken, you can always put a chief on it. That always clears the conflict. You can also put a borgier, but that's not something the submitter wanted. You can split the field and have one charge be across the field and counterchanging. You can have two at the top and one at the bottom. You can have a bend with two on either side. You can put things on the bend. You can use a complex field division, or you can have the field divided and a chief. There's all sorts of different options. So in just those quick notes, you can see very easily coming up with 9 different designs is entirely doable, and a lot more could be done if I took the time to create an algorithm to put together all the different permutations. I easily, with those 9 different items, hundreds of different permutations of designs could be done. So now that you've heard the various options, I recommend that you go to your local Herald or contact me, and I will happily work with you or direct you to someone who can work with you to take your ideas and your concepts and sort of smoosh them all together into a design that is going to look absolutely fantastic on everything that you put it on. Alternatively, we will take what you really, really want, which is all of the things that you came into the design with, and sigh, sadly, and put them on a form, shake our head, collect your money, and make you happy by giving you exactly what you want, within the rules, of course. So, all that said, that is the end of my tutorial, my lesson. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm easy to get in contact with at any of these locations. And in the meantime, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen. If I can find my mouse, there we go. And we can come back to the room. And if there are any other questions, comments, discussions, now is a perfect time to do that. Let's see, Fred says that we have the same last name. Fantastic, we're both big. Big Cormac, big Fred.
Oh, I had a question.
Yes.
When putting out the paperwork, obviously putting out the blazon in there and then asking for the references, are we asking for, like, I don't know what I worded earlier.
a reference for it in SCA or the design or the heraldry, or like, are you looking for the image that we're using in the history, or what is it looking for a reference of?
I think the part of the form that you're looking at is whether you're using charges that you are entitled to or not. So there are certain things that you can put on your shield only if you have a certain rank. So for example, as a pelican, I can put a pelican in its piety or a cap of maintenance on its shield, but people who are not companions of the pelican cannot. A knight may put a chain, circular chain, as a bordure around his shield. I'm sure you've seen plenty of knights do that. They are quite fond of the ability to let people know that they are knights, because the white belt is not visible enough. If you are a royal peer or a holder of a court barony, then you may put a crown on your shield. If you are a count or a countess, you can put an embattled coronet. If you are a duke or a duchess, you can put a coronet with strawberry leaves. Otherwise, the style of coronet is left to the depictor. So if you were using a coronet and you were a court baron, then you would note for the reference that you are a court baron and where you got it. Otherwise, the submission looks only at the image. If you're providing, if you're using a charge that's never been used in the SCA before, then you'll need to provide documentation of its existence. But that is very rare, unless you're getting really creative, in which case, kudos to you and call me if you have problems. Most likely, you're just going to submit the image. I will say that charges that have not been used in more than a decade do need to be redocumented, and you should talk to your herald to make sure that all the charges that you are using either have been used in the last decade or have sufficient documentation.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem at all. Any other questions?
I had a quick question about gores. I have not seen a whole lot of them. Are there any of the charges that have strange meanings attached to them by any chance?
So, if you look in a bestiary, you'll find all sorts of different attributes ascribed to various animals. Bears are lazy. Why I've got my bear symbol.
Oh,
You know,
sorry. His Excellency designed heraldry for us, in which my device is a bear.
you know, sometimes people just like bears. The thing about SCA heraldry, other than some charges have been universally used to mean a particular thing, for example, a blue feather, through use of clan blue feather, has largely come to mean a member of the LGBTQ community. It does not always mean that, but anyone who submits a blue feather should be aware that the perception will be there, whether it is intended or not. But by and large, the thing about heraldry is that it is a symbol of you, and as you use it, it will take the meaning that you give it. So this is my device, for example. It is professed with the right step or an argent. It is intentionally vague in design because I didn't want anyone going, oh, it's that kind of person, other than shiny, which my device undeniably is, being profess or with a right step or an argent, metal next to metal. So it's not an issue with tincture. So anytime people see that design, they don't think, oh, it's another bear or lion or whatever, you know, it's a shamrock, the guy's Irish. They instead see that and go, that's Cormac, which is exactly what it's supposed to be. If you think of heraldry as a personal logo, then it really helps to impress the idea of it is your personal brand, your personal concept. And if you think of, for example, fast food chains, the golden arches do not represent hamburgers, but you see the golden arches and you know the hamburgers are there. A gold smiling star on a red field doesn't look like a hamburger, but you know that you can go to either Hardee's or Carl's Jr. and see that heraldry and go, I can get a hamburger there. Jack in the Box Before it was just a red box that was tilted that said Jack in the Box, it was an actual Jack in the Box popping out. Again, nothing to do with hamburgers. Burger King's logo is a stylized burger. We don't talk about it. But you see that for all of the really iconic logos are items that don't necessarily represent visually the product they sell. Apple is a classic example. You're not going to get any produce out of your Macintosh computer. I know, it's really sad. And yet you see the Apple icon with a little bite out of it, and you know that's a computer. Unless you're listening to music, in which case you go, that's the Beatles.
Oh dear. Deep cuts.
Yes, nice deep cuts. So on the screen here, you can see 9 different designs, all of which are registered to me, each of which either represent me or mine. So this is my device. This is my household badge. So you see this, and this is a representation of Poorhouse. It's designed to be my livery colors, but in a more simplified form. And it's hard to get simpler than my device, but I managed it. The oak leaf here is what I put on my friends and followers. People, if you see an oak leaf pin, you know that it's my version of licking them and marking them as my own. The punner here is my maker's mark. Normally, you're only going to see that on stuff that I've produced. I'm working on starting merchanting. The trumpets here, they're actually torches. They are definitely not trumpets with flames coming out of the bells. I don't know why everybody keeps claiming that. They are registered as torches. Thank you very much. And yes, I do use them when doing heraldic things, including the Poorhouse Academy of Heraldry, which uses the torches. The brown bear's head is my crest, which is why it's above my head. It sits on top of my shield, sometimes wearing a cap of maintenance, but usually not. And then the items here are newly registered badges, which are insignia for the newly formed Company of the Tabard, for heralds who wish to represent that they are heralds outside of and beyond holding the office of the Society for Creative Anachronism, Inc., including the shield for macers or heralds in training, the banner for pursuivants, and the tabard itself for capital H heralds, senior level heralds. There's going to be a lot more information coming out on that, but for now, suffice to say, the stuff on the right side of your screen is super, super cool, and everyone should look forward to hearing about it in the near future, especially if you're heralds. Very especially if you're heralds.
With your personal device and your household device, aren't you not supposed to have metal and metal next to each other?
So metal next to metal is perfectly fine, because the idea, the language of the rule of tinctures, you can't put color on color or metal on metal. This is a field evenly divided into gold and silver, which you can do both for a simple line of division or a complex one. There are certain color combinations which are really hard to see when they're complex color combinations. So like purple and black, for example, or purple and blue, black and blue. Those are really hard to see, but by and large, color next to color is perfectly fine. The design that was shown earlier with the black and red chevron on the black and red field, because the chevron is a charge, it's not a field division. It's not evenly dividing the field into 2 different colors. So that's why there has to be better contrast on that, which is why you'll be adding little silver stripes to fimbriate it.
I see.
Yeah.
Because they kept telling me color on color, but I'm like, but they're separated and easily identifiable. They're not on, they're next to. So that's why so this is charges, not field, and that's why the conflict comes in.
Right. The chevron itself is considered a charge. For use of color, 2 colors or 2 metals in lines and fields of division, you can only do it with fields divided into 2 different pieces, quarterly or per saltire. Otherwise, you would have to document doing that. Now, there is potential documentation for your design with the black and red chevron. However, dividing the field like that and having it be counterchanged is a little bit more difficult. There's a practice called an individually attested pattern. So the rules that I've been describing in this class are about the core rules of heraldry. otherwise known as the lazy rules of heraldry, or what we generally accept was done through heraldic time periods from 1100 all the way through to the end of our period. That does not mean that's the only thing that heralds did. There were a lot of things that heralds did, especially as heraldry moved from the Anglo-Norman core of heraldry, and as it pushed east in a game of telephone through Germany and Italy and into Hungary and finally up into Russia past period, things got weird. The rule of contrast got kind of skewed as it pushed into Germany, so black and red is pretty common in German heraldry. Not as common as a lot of people like to think it is, and there are certain ways in which it was used. But as you push into Italian heraldry, you see a lot of green hills at the bottom of fields, regardless of what the background is. So there's a lot of tincture issues there. And then as you push on into Hungary, you'd see a lot of blue backgrounds with black animals on green fields. As you see that, you go, oh, that's Hungarian heraldry. I know exactly where that's from. So you can do that in SCA heraldry, but there's parameters by which you're allowed to do that. So you basically have to, instead of going, I'm going to use the lazy core rules of heraldry, instead, I'm going to put together an arts and sciences presentation where you prove, A, that everything that you're using in a shield can be dated to a particular time period and location, usually by taking a single roll of arms and going, all right, I have a chevron and a crescent, and here's the roll of arms in German heraldry that has the chevron here and the crescent here. So those two things are used. And also I'm using argent, sable, and gules, and they were all used in this. And then also showing the thing that breaks the core rules, namely the color on color chevron charge, specifically a split ordinary over, counterchanged over a field in sable and gules that has a high contrast charge on it, finding 3 examples either of the chevron in that formation or 6 similarly used ordinaries. So that's the parameters. You can find it all in SINA, the rules for heraldry that are currently up. Or you can talk to a senior level herald to be able to help you. And if you have more questions on that, if you really do want to pursue your design without the fimbriations, or otherwise known as the lazy, easy guardrails of not having to do an individually tested pattern, then I can see what I can find, and we can sit down and get that done.
Fred probably has the book now because it was part of our library. I found the split chevron design in one of the books, and that's what I use as my baseline to come up with this. And I figured black and red would be too simple, so I put the sable or the argent crescent on there to give a little more character and something to kind of stand out on.
Sure. Did you find the black and red motif in the book, or just the split chevron design?
I think the split chevron design. I chose the colors differently.
Yeah, the black and red you might have found if you had a copy of Siebmacher's Wappenbuch, but that's not a fairly common one for a local heraldic library. But it is available online. It dates to 1605, which is what we consider our gray period. Armory that appears in Siebmacher is considered probably to have existed in 1600. They just didn't get around to writing that particular Wappenbuch or roll of arms until 5 years after period.
I see.
Are there any attentions paid to the language of flowers in Armory?
Not much, to be perfectly honest. Like I said, there's some things that had meaning in period, but most of the meanings of charges were given as a Victorian concept. The Victorians were incredibly fond of pointing to things and said, that means this, which is where we get the preponderance of the language of flowers being used to send passive-aggressive messages via bouquet to one another. If that's something that matters to you, and if you wish to use that, or likewise if you're a Shakespearean who wishes to use rosemaries for remembrance and posies for thoughts, then it's certainly something you can do, but it does not necessarily represent what the heralds are going to sit down and translate your heraldry as.
What about I don't want to use the word like religious symbology, like crosses or variants of crosses as charges?
They were very popular in period, and they are popular in the SCA as well. There's more of a preponderance of non-Christian symbols than one might expect in period, but that's perfectly fine. The only rule that we have against that is not having overly religious symbolism or potentially offensive religious symbolism. So, for example, a pentacle, the voided five-pointed interlaced star within an annulet. See, I think it was 2008 when it was finally allowed to be registered again. It was banned during the 80s due to the Satanic Panic, and it was not until it was recognized that they were being used at Arlington on headstones that we finally went, yeah, maybe it isn't as offensive as we thought. But a pentacle on fire with a paschal lamb that has been dismembered underneath it and a flaming goat skull on top, little much, a little too death metal-y, and probably not going to be allowed. A cross is perfectly fine. A cross on fire is going to be rejected at the onset for being offensive due to its ties to the Ku Klux Klan. Generally, use your head. If you have a particular religious symbol that matters to you, use it tastefully and sensibly. And if you want to put it on your shield, by all means do so. One of the most common motifs for religious symbolism, other than the cross, which is obvious, is the three moon motif, the crescent and crescent with the circle in the center. Very popular among pagan folks and other traditions, Wicca, before the pentacle was allowed. And due to the fact that not everybody got the memo on the fact that pentacles are now allowed, is still a very common and popular motif. So that is to be expected.
Our daughter has a question, I think. Did you have a question? Okay, you want to talk?
Dang it.
She's been poking in the back of the head this entire time, which
I
means she's...
forgot.
Oh, did it have to do with your foxes and your sphinx?
I do have another one just quickly. If you
Yeah, let's go ahead and turn the spotlight, James. What's your question?
Yeah, I belong to a Scottish family of some note, and in real life, my family is quite well known. You might have heard of the MacDonalds, Lord of the Isles, and I'm a direct Mellon descendant of Flora MacDonald. Now, the MacDonald crest includes a mailed fist holding the cross of St. Lorraine. Bringing this more to general, are there, you said that there are some symbols which are only used by people of certain rank, but are there other symbols which are, or other charges which are specific to certain periods or certain, say, royal lines that people are not entitled to, such as 3 lions passant regarded?
So there are certain very few motifs actually that are restricted. The chain to Scarbuncle of Navarre is very unique to Navarre, and so you can't really use it. The motif of France, specifically blue background and 3 or more gold fleurs de lis, was used both by the kings of France, but also by the companions of Charlemagne and their descendants, the peers of France, to the point where anyone around in period, no matter where they were from, if they saw the blue background with 3 or more fleurs de lis, would go, you are related to France. So using that is considered presumptuous. Using 3 lions of any tincture other than gold with a red background is probably going to be fine, because there were plenty of people who were not the English royal line that used the leopards and pale. Other motifs that are considered presumptuous are the Treasure Flory Counterflory, or double Treasure Flory Counterflory, which is the little Borgia design on the arms of Scotland, specifically because that was used as an augmentation of arms by Scotland. So
If you're from Scotland or England.
well, if you're from Scotland, you still can't use it because it is considered a high honor. Much
Yes,
like
it's a royal
not
symbol.
put a blue garter around your shield.
Right,
Because
no,
that
I
is
get
a
it.
very
I get it.
specific claim. As for the McDonald's, if you use certain well-known images or symbols in combination with the name, so for example, if you use, like, just flat out try to use the arms of McDonald, and also have the last name McDonald, then we're probably going to bounce it because you're claiming to be that McDonald, as opposed to Old McDonald or Ronald McDonald, which are also presumptuous, but in a completely different way. But the motif of the mailed fist holding the cross, not a restricted motif at all. You can happily use it. I'm pretty sure you can actually use it while using the name McDonald as well.
Well, that's it. It's the only symbol of Clan MacDonald is the mailed fist across the center right. That's it. That's the only thing there is.
Well, that's the clan badge of MacDonald, which is seen inside a belt, which you also can't use because that's a representation of clan belts. But just the fist is fine. But there's also the arms of the clan chief, which are different and are that is a separate item. Does that make sense? Excellent, fantastic.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you spell Seedmacher?
Siebmacher.
Sieb. What was the last?
Macher. Like maker, but a ch.
Okay, got you. Thank you very much. I want to download that.
You're welcome. And you're specifically looking for the 1605 Waffenbuch. It was updated over and over and over again through the mid-1800s, if I recall correctly. So you want to make sure that you get the first version of it so that you don't get a lot of post-period weirdness.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I think waffenbuch.de will take you to it. That's the easiest place to find it. There have also been people who have done ordinaries of Seedmacher, so it's sort of a catalog of what all is in there.
Okay.
I see we got a new person in, Alina Trupenny. Who's being shy? That's fine. Did we get that other question in from Clovisland?
She was wondering about phoenixes. We've been going with a fox, and then she saw that you had a sphinx, and then I believe you may have mentioned phoenixes, or her brain went there, and so it was. She was just concerned that phoenixes with their tails on fire might be considered offensive, but I told her probably not.
No, flames at the bottom.
Oh, flames at the bottom. Excuse me, not with their tail feathers on fire.
She is in fact exactly correct. A bird with its tail feathers on fire is not currently registerable, but a phoenix rising from flames is not only registered, but is in fact a very popular motif and is a really cool one. And the fun thing about that is that the flames constitute half the charge. So if you're looking to pass a phoenix and are looking to get a point of difference from all the existing phoenixes, choose a weird color of flame and a weird color of phoenix, and you'll clear pretty much all conflicts.
No.
Okay. She really liked the flames, I have to tell you. That was
It's going to be a green X.
With flames next.
what?
Right.
It's going to be a green X.
Yep.
Yes, most likely with that child.
Yep. Purple flames and a green phoenix rising from them. That'd be pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm bored. Stop giving bad ideas.
Oh, she says stop giving her bad ideas.
I'm a nerd. I'm full of bad ideas.
What is the SCA for? Not bad ideas.
Right.
I'm a corrupting influence. What can I say?
She's corrupted many other people, so you guys would be in good company.
But by the way, for anyone using this video being cropped and used at the eventual trial that I'm going to end up, I'm a corrupting influence. What can I say? Don't use that. That's taken out of context. It's no good.
Not a jury in the world would convict. Don't worry.
With this face.
Don't worry. Excellency is great at his editing skills.
All right, well, let's see. It's just hit 8 o'clock. Do you have any further questions or seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and call it an evening. Thank you all for coming out. Heraldry is my passion. I hope that it has ignited some passion in you as well. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out either to your local Herald, Kingdom Heralds, or myself.
Well, thank you very much for joining us and bringing us this class. You're taking the time to do so. And yes, our daughter will now be hounding us for her own devices.
Maybe that will keep you guys working on yours.
Oh yeah, and how is that going along?
You should actually consider having her design your arms for you. We found that children who approach heraldry, especially 10 and younger, come up with more period designs than adults do.
That's awesome.
Well, so I have to say really quickly, you were talking about the trumpets with flames.
Yeah, the torches, please. They are torches.
Yes, they are torches. Yes, His Excellency has a rose that is actually a clove of garlic. So yes, we appreciated your torches.
Excellent.
Not to put any stress on you, but after Luther's device passes, Aurelia's device passes, and your devices pass, then I'm going to get myself a Cairns just to be annoying and make beautiful music when we're at events.
We look forward to it. And Cormac, I believe, has a lovely singing voice. So, you know,
fairly lovely singing voice.
Yes, so we can have a party. I've heard him perform.
But I'm also wicked on the Rommel pot, and that is a really fun toy.
Well, we will look forward to that particular performance. But yeah, if there are not any other questions, it sounds like Cormac is ready to nod off for the evening.
A pleasure to virtually meet you, cousin.
Likewise. Thank you again for coming, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
We look forward to seeing you again in person.
Until then.
Come on, shut down the class.
Waiting for that recording light to turn off.
That would be His Excellency's job.